Good evening, everyone, and welcome again to the Red Pill Religion podcast. I'm Andrew Stratalites, taking the place of Max, who is a guest today, but he will be going on sabbatical for a bit, and you'll be hearing my voice a lot more often. So tonight we are going through Crash Course, I believe it's called Crash Course Philosophy. Besides myself and Max, we also have Buckley. Say hello to everyone, Buckley.
Why, hello, everybody. It's good to be here.
And White Ungen, or Indian, or I don't know. Sorry, we haven't talked very much, so I don't know how I should announce you.
I'm a White Engine, no longer. I'm HistoryNet now.
Okay, well, welcome HistoryNet.
The parody of ScienceNet.
Perfect. And of course, we have the infamous Max Kolbe, who is, among other people, myself.
Hey everybody, good to hear, good to see you. Yeah, if everybody hasn't noticed, the channel name has changed. I was quite honestly exploiting fame and some what I thought necessary unpleasant business that me and quite a bit of the people, not Andrew, not everybody present, but quite a few of the people who were on the team originally had started to do. We knew that we had to do something with some of the people we've been fighting with. It's pretty much over now, and this has always been a team effort, and we are Red Pill Religion. We've been a team for about 3 years now, close to. And so this is the Red Pill Religion channel from now on. And I'm not going to be the only guy you're going to see on here. I never did want to be. My dream is we develop into a regular series of shows with multiple people. So with that said, what were we going to talk about tonight?
There's a video that HistoryNet found called "What is God Like?" by Crash Course Philosophy that has a few errors in it related especially to Aquinas, which you Catholics, that is Max and Buckley, will be able to point out some flaws with and go from there. So basically, it makes a lot of the same types of errors that atheists do when they talk about God. So without further ado, let's see if I can figure out how to share my desktop.
All right, but this is not an atheist channel. This they mainly talk about history and stuff.
I've found that a ton of what has to be called the cultural Marxist propaganda just seeps into people that not even aware that they're in error. I mean, they may not literally know that they're in error.
Each professional anti-theist has up to 500 or 2,000 at least up to subscribers, but the highest one would be TJ, which has 1 million. So yeah. These guys have up to 8 million. So that's kind of low.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, and maybe be real. Most of TJ's accounts are going to be dead accounts at this point. But anyway. Excuse me. Sorry, everybody.
Okay, so can everyone see my screen?
I can.
Okay, is audio coming through, or do I have to do something for that?
Let's see. Play it. No, audio is not coming through. Oh, no, you don't know how to do this. Oh, no, we might have to switch gears, guys, because the only way I've been able to figure out how to make that work is by downloading the video and pumping it through my speakers.
Oh dear.
You need Google no longer makes that. There's a bunch of stuff you have to do a response video. You might want to reschedule plans. We might want to talk about something else here tonight.
Well, we can.
You know what? Hang on. You know, we're still in learning curves. Send me the URL to that video.
Yep.
So anything can happen. Send me the URL. It will take me less than a minute to get it going.
Okay, sure thing.
This transition will cause some confusion. So let me plug my speakers in. There is a way. Yeah, we will see. Okay. There is a way to do this within YouTube that we never set up because they've added it so that you can do response videos on your own. But we don't have time for that today. So I'm going to grab the video. And I'm almost there, guys. Thank you so much for being patient, audience. There we go. Now let me just share my screen. Oh, dears. It's not letting me screen shares. I will need about 1 more minute. This will be a little like an LSD trip, but hang on.
Na, 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 na.
Hey there. Can everybody hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
All right, here we go, guys. I actually can do this now. I've downloaded it, and we can share it. So should I just hit go?
Yeah, go for it.
Crash Course Philosophy is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace, share your passion with the world.
We've spent quite a bit of time looking at arguments for God's existence, but we haven't said much yet about this God. Like, what's he like? Is he a he? Superheroes, or is he more of a DC guy? Does he prefer his salsa with or without cilantro? I like corn. Who's his favorite crystal gem from Steven Universe? I guess those kinds of questions would only apply to a heavily personalized and anthropomorphic God. But the traditional picture of God, the one accepted and even assumed throughout Judeo-Christian tradition up into modern times, is what we might call an omni-God, possessing particular divine attributes, the characteristics believed to be held by God. Now let's pause for a moment to acknowledge that this discussion is of one particular God, the one who stars in Jewish, Christian, and Muslim scriptures. Of course, lots of people believe in lots of other gods, and they all have attributes of their own. We're focusing on this God because he's the one all of the philosophers we've been studying were talking about. He's the one they believed or didn't believe in.
Am I already catching a familiar theme we have here on Reptile Religion? Is that the God of, as described by Aristotle, Plato, and Socrates, and Bantu philosophers, and quite a few other native, religions, you might say, Skyfather religions actually all had the same basic concept of God as the philosophers,
and the so-called heretic pharaoh.
Yeah. So it's not just the. I mean, I have to. I mean, sure. I'll come make that case for you that Christ is the, and the divine as the divine logos and all that. But no, the God you're talking about does not just apply to these three religions.
That's right.
I would like to also point out that what he calls the omni-God could either apply to one of two views of monotheism, either the neotheism, which is found in the philosophical works of modern English-speaking philosophers like William Lane Craig and Alvin Plantinga, and classical theism, which goes all the way back to Plato and Aristotle, and is consistent throughout most of the traditions of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, as well as, and it's also compatible with Hinduism as well, at least certain parts of Hinduism.
Oh yeah, no matter what they tell you, the Hindus believe in one almighty God, but the lesser deities they also worship are extensions of the one God.
Well, it really depends on the school of Hinduism. Some schools within Hinduism do emphasize the one God, capital G, and then
Brahman.
And then the same is true in Buddhism. Some of which kind of treat the God question as irrelevant, but some are like they still acknowledge it, or they have a more.
That's a small amount of Buddhists and Confucians.
Okay, and the Sikhs kind of same way. They see God as remote and unknowable, but pray to him anyway. It's kind of
it is relatively recent, but yeah.
Yep. No, and the Baha'i. I mean, okay. Anyway, I think we've made the point. Shall I go on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Philosophers like Augustine and Thomas Aquinas, who were themselves influenced by the writings of Plato and Aristotle, came up with a general set of divine attributes that are still widely held among today's theists. And in this view, God is omniscient, which means that he knows everything that can be known, and he's also omnipotent, or all-powerful. He's been said to be omnibenevolent, or possessing perfect goodness, and he's omnitemporal and omnipresent, meaning he exists at all places and all times at once. Now, it's worth noting that none of these attributes is actually mentioned in the Bible, but philosophers like,
what?
It's not mentioned in the Bible, so therefore it doesn't exist.
Well, it actually is mentioned in the Bible, but it's mentioned in the Deuterocanon.
Yeah, the point. The Bible is saying many of these things using different words, right? I mean,
like if there is Bible stress that there is one God. Well, actually, especially during the post-exilic, scriptures. But yeah, they emphasize that there's one Creator God, the progenitor of all that lives, and the source of all being. So it would stand to reason that God is all powerful.
When he's the Alpha and the Omega, before all things, after all things, beyond all things, the words are somewhat different than what you're saying, but it does say that. People have noticed this for 2,000 years, by the way, which is why an awful lot of Greeks converted to Christianity, because
there's also several things. There's verses like, "For nothing will be impossible with God."
Right.
Or things like, with people this is impossible, but with God all things are possible.
He knows you down to the number of hairs on your head. He knows you personally, every single one of us, down to every hair on your head. What? Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, well, here's one from Isaiah. Have you not known, have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of heaven and earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. I mean, that's like you exactly said.
Then there's I am the first, I am the last. Besides me, there is no God.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, that was second Isaiah, but yeah.
This is like you've epistemologied away in a way to say, the Bible doesn't say these things because you use different words to say the same thing. Not fair.
The Bible doesn't even say the word Trinity anywhere, but most Christians are Trinitarians, so square that one.
But even Jewish scholars will tell you that the Trinity concept goes back to the Old Testament, because you got Yahweh, the angel of Yahweh, and the spirit of Yahweh.
An Orthodox Jew would probably lose his mind on that, but there's probably Jews who think that way. Yeah.
The spirit of Yahweh was the Holy Spirit, and the angel of Yahweh was the pre-incarnate Christ.
I really like these guys. I'm sorry, what's his name again? Oh man, I really. What's the name of this channel again that we're looking at?
Crash Course Philosophy.
Yeah, Crash Course Philosophy. I've seen his channel before. I wanted to address him by name. If everybody listening to this would please, using your social media, Twitter or whatever, invite him to talk to us, because he's making errors, and we have real philosophical training here where you're just making some errors here, and they're worth acknowledging. And we're very ecumenical here. We're different religions here. We're into the philosophy of this. Let them know we're talking about them. See if we can get us some attention, because they're not ill-intentioned, but they're making some basic errors here.
Oh, definitely. To be fair, though, he is trying to talk about trying to differentiate between the traditional view of God and like the comic book version of God that a lot of modern people imagine.
Right, and he's doing a pretty good job on that. He really is. So more or less, but still, it's like he's muddying the waters somehow.
He called God. Well, he made the mistake of calling capital G God just another God among many, which is never a good thing, because that's very common. That's a very common atheist trope.
And that some of our more fundamentalist Christians also make. No. the actual God concept is universal. And we could show that in science as well as history, as well as comparative religion, as well in the history of philosophy. This is, I mean, the Taoists had the idea of God, you know, before hundreds of years at least before Jesus. I had the idea. So, sorry.
All right.
All right, let's
Does anybody else have one thing to say? All right, go on.
Keep going. I'm going to try and give them at least a minute. This is so much more fun than some of the atheist response videos. Here we go.
Aquinas reasoned that they must be the case if God is perfect, and these philosophers took it as given that he is. The problem is, a close investigation of these attributes reveals some rather tricky little puzzles. No, I take that back. They are really, really big puzzles.
I like when they do this.
Can God create a rock so heavy he can't lift it? Is just questions that can be asked about God. Like, if God is omnipotent, he has to be able to create something so heavy he can't lift it. Otherwise,
oh no, he doesn't.
Mean that there's at least one. But then he would, because if he were truly all powerful.
Okay.
Oh God, this is awful. Please stop. Hold it.
All right.
Can I? Hey, so who wants to go first and take apart this nonsense?
You go for it, Buckley.
Okay. He's basically asking the same thing as, can God create a squared circle? Or could God create a married bachelor?
Or a virgin slut.
Yeah, this is exactly. This is just he's asking God to create something that isn't even possible to create. So yeah, if God is all powerful. That means he has all powers that are possible. But it's impossible. But there is no such thing as a power to create a rock so heavy that God can't lift it. There just is not. That power just doesn't exist at all. It's nothing. It's nonsense. You might as well ask gobbledygook Nala. You know, it's just that's how nonsensical this so-called paradox is.
Right, and so let's get into the reason why this is paradoxical. So God is able to do all things, right? That's what it means to be omnipotent. Can God take an action X such that X is not in the set of all possible actions? Is another way to look at this problem. And it's like, no, because if X isn't in the set of all possible actions, it's not actually an action.
Yeah, that's basically what I was saying. If God has all powers, but so he can't have powers that don't exist.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say that goes right to the ontological argument, which they have not covered very well. I've seen him try to cover the ontological argument. I do that sometime, but go ahead.
The other thing is it's an indexing problem, right? Sometimes this is claimed that, like, you know, I, Andrus Jatalites, can pour concrete such that I make a rock that's heavier than I can lift, and God can't make a rock that's heavier than God can lift. Therefore, I have an ability that God doesn't. But this is an indexing problem, right? Because if we rephrase this, I can make a rock that is beyond my capability to lift, but God is also able to make a rock that is greater than my capability to lift. So that's not an inability on God that I have.
Yeah, it's only troubling in that apparently you guys, I mean, even C.S. Lewis has addressed this one, although I found his answer not quite sufficient for me, but I won't get into it. But yeah, it's almost a word game question. Get a more coherent definition of God, the one that will pretty much reasonably be accepted by everything, which is, you know, an ultimate intelligence that is operating absolutely all reality, operating time, operating space, if there are other dimensions or other universes, has to be operating those too and keeping the separation between them that appears to be there. It has to be the ultimate being that would be running everything. And we have to have one of those. Otherwise, the universe would fall into incoherence. That's what us theists would argue. That's what Socrates would have agreed with. That who's not even, Abrahamic. That's what quite a few philosophers in other non-Abrahamic traditions would be saying. The ultimate being running everything. That, by the way, we have evidence for that in contemporary science, is a normal, intuitive belief to grasp in children, with most of them. So, in any case, anybody got anything else?
Just sort of riffing off your point, another way to look at omnipotence is God is the final cause or the root cause of everything that happens and exists, right? And in that sense, he's omnipotent. All the actions that occur in the universe are due to God. And that's another way to look at omnipotence that doesn't have this paradox come out of it.
Exactly. Again, you guys seriously continue. I'm going to predict that nowhere in this have they ever looked at the philosophical implications of the random causeless universe that blindly runs itself randomly. I mean, just throwing that out as a suggestion, because that's when I began questioning my own atheism. Well, that and quite a few other experiences. But all right, should we proceed?
Yep.
All right. I'm going to let it go as long until somebody screams.
He'd be able to lift anything. Quandaries like this come up all the time when you consider the divine attributes. And some of the questions that arise are not only about God, but also about us. For instance, if God knows everything, then he also knows the future, right? Which makes sense if he's also omnitemporal, because that would mean that he's already in the future and also in the past. And don't forget the present. So many theists also believe that God gave us free will. So how can we be free if God already knows what we're going to do? In that case, are we really free, or is freedom just an illusion that he created for us to make us feel like we're in control?
Okay, that's
great.
That's
all right. I got an answer for that.
That engine.
Like, most of these questions have been addressed and debated and answered for centuries, but I have a solution that's relatively new. Like, with the discovery of Schroeder's cat and all that. But God knows all possible futures and all possible pasts. And the choices we make set us on the different paths and different directions our lives take and stuff like that. Like, God knows what's going to happen, but we have you know where I'm getting with this, right?
Oh, I actually really like that, because this is one that's one I've wrestled with, and maybe Andrew, who's better at philosophy than me, will call it. But saying God knows all possible futures, that's actually pretty good. I think that's
and all possible pasts.
And all possible paths.
There's that verse in Peter that says 1,000 days. No, yeah, 1,000 years to us is 1 year to God, and 1,000 years to God is 1 day to us. Like, that may seem paradoxical, but in other words, it's saying that time has no meaning for God.
Yes, and by the way, he seems to be lacking the concepts of like, what is eternity, which is, completely beyond time. Is there anything that's completely beyond time? Probably. That's what we classically call eternity. Just pointing it out. So
they always object, like, well, why did God wait 14 billion years? I'm like, yeah, time has no meaning.
No, really. And actually, that goes to another reality that I've tried to hit people with that they don't want to hear, which is that physicists still have absolutely no objective measure of time whatsoever, and can't clearly tell you what it is. They really can't. But
the multiverse idea itself is not very new. Like, various faiths and beliefs had some sense of it in one stage or another.
Absolutely so. Yeah, absolutely so.
That includes heaven and hell.
He seems to be artificially restricting the terms of how he, overcomplicating what is not a difficult idea, and ultimate intelligence running everything, as opposed to what, all just kind of randomly do that. Just saying. But anyway, to get back to the free will question, actually, Andrew, what do you think of that? God knows all futures and past with an answer. I've never heard it before, but it's a pretty good resolution in my head.
Yeah, that I think is a good way to look at it. The way that I have liked to look at it before is what is eternity like, right? So this sort of assumes that eternity is like the past, right? That God looks at the universe as something unchanging. But it seems to me, based on the Bible and other things we know, that eternity is more like the present, and God, in some sense, sees everything at once in the same way that we see one instance all at once.
Yeah, a good metaphor that I've heard in the past, which I didn't entirely like, but would seem satisfactory, was, you know, okay, if you watch a movie, your favorite movie, you watch it all the way, watched it.
Stir of Echoes.
Excuse me,
guys. My internet completely crashed just now.
Okay, everybody just quiet down. We'll just resume from here. Please quiet down. Like I said, an earlier answer to this that I don't like as much, but is still pretty good, is that if you have a favorite movie and, you know, you've watched it 10 times, let's say it's Pulp Fiction or whatever it is, you know how it's going to end every single time. Did that mean that the people who made it, including the actors, had no free will at the time? But I mean, that's a little more sympathetic to the Calvinist worldview, which I can't help it. It's just spiritually I can't handle it. I grew up in it and I reject it. But
I got to interrupt. Deflating Atheism guy wants in on this.
Please let him in. Always.
Yeah. I'd like to get into on this. This is omniscience and free will, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so what I've never actually understood this objection, because omniscience by itself cannot invalidate somebody else's free will. Just because you know ahead of time what somebody's going to do does not mean that that person did not choose to do it. That just doesn't. I cannot get that. I can't get that straight in my head. How is that like? If, for instance, if it was something like God's omnipotence or God's divine providence interfering with free will, I could understand that objection. But omniscience by itself is not enough to interfere with free will.
Okay. Anybody else want in, or should I keep going?
The Deflating Atheism guy wants in, but one guy in the comments says, "Can God make an argument for his existence so dumb even atheists can't believe it?"
There you go. I like that. All right, let's just go ahead and go on. And Deflating Atheism has the link. He'll be here or he won't. Let's see.
What we're seeing here is that, at least on the surface, God's traditional divine attributes are internally inconsistent, meaning they can't all be true at the same time. And what do you do if you hold inconsistent beliefs? Well, if you're being philosophically rational, you either give some of them up or you figure out a way to understand them that makes them consistent. This is what a theist who believes in the omni-God has to do. Let's think about the contradiction that arises from believing the following propositions. 1, God is omniscient. 2, humans have free will. Is there any way to resolve this contradiction, or do we have to surrender one of those beliefs? One?
Yes.
The multiverse already went over this, but
we gave 2 ways to combine them. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I mean, what was the I gave that there's no conflict because
we've already answered.
It's impossible. I would say that it's impossible in principle for omniscience to interfere with free will.
Expand upon that. How is it impossible for omniscience to expand upon?
Okay. All right. Imagine there was such a thing as an omniscient brain in a jar. And this omniscient brain in a jar knew that somebody was going to come in and break its jar and smash the brain open. And this omniscient brain in a jar does not want to have its head smashed open. But the thing is, he is just a brain in a jar. All he The only outstanding quality about it is that he's omniscient. Now, under this, under the atheist, according to the atheist logic, the brain in the jar is somehow mind controlling guy into hitting it just because he knows the guy will hit it. How does that make sense?
There you go. All right, there's more for you to think. So yeah, this seems to be like to get it. This is refreshing. This is like a new kind of atheist response video, because this guy is pretty ideologically committed to his atheism, just not in a very, you know, even self-conscious way. Just his presuppositional atheism and his way of atomizing questions, and having not obviously consulted multiple philosophical sources, going back to, you know, Plato. What is your philosophical background?
Well, they talk about Plato and Aristotle, but
oh god,
this guy's ideological about his atheism.
I don't know if he's as ideological as the idiots, but I mean, he seems to have this presuppositional atheism going. He seems to not have consulted any of the sources that would. I mean, some of these are just easy. This is what I would point out to him. I mean, like 15-year-olds I've heard can give answers to some of these.
Well, I'll actually be very frank, and he might not even be an atheist, and he's just sort of showing the condition of modern philosophy. Most people that don't come from a classical Christian background or specialize in medieval philosophy actually don't know the details of the arguments that Plato and Aristotle make.
And when they do, like, I've read about this. There was a Thomistic philosopher by the name of Edward Fraser, and he was an atheist during the 90s. And he talked about how he read it when he was in college, a young kid in college, he read Aristotle and Plato and all these different ancient authors while he was in college, but he did not understand them at all. Like, he read them, but he didn't understand them at all. So he didn't internalize their arguments. He didn't actually look over how these people, how smart these people actually were. So that could be another thing. He could be just misinterpreting what these people are saying, because, you know, it's just a crash course philosophy. It's not in-depth philosophy.
Here's an answer for his reader, his audience, for their audiences. Yeah, here, pick up Professor Edward Fraser's 5 Proofs of the Existence of God. It has been updated for modern language and modern, modes of expression and such, but it's the same 5 proofs that have stood the test of time for thousands of years, going back to before Jesus and invoking philosophers who aren't even in the, the Judeo-Christian tradition or the Abrahamic or whatever you want. I'm sorry, this is just, you should understand what people are saying. Answers to these apparent paradoxes you're posing are available, and they still should be juxtaposed with what is your apparent, presuppositional atheism, which is probably part of your philosophical training, your modern philosophical training, which I would hate to use the word indoctrination, but I mean, the presuppositions that are coming out of your mouth, guy, it's like, how hard have you sought out answers to these? Because I'm not even a trained philosopher, and some of your stuff, I'm like, really? You didn't know this? I'm not being condescending. Maybe I probably am, and it's probably pissing them off. But these guys need to learn more. Maybe we better keep going.
Yeah, sure.
One possible response is to say that knowledge and causation aren't the same thing. So God might know that we're going to do something without actually causing us to do it.
Yes!
If you think about it, imagine a person standing on a cliff looking down at a train track that curves around a bend. From her vantage point, the onlooker can see that just on the other side of the bend, a person is stuck on the track as the train approaches. Too far away to do anything, the onlooker knows the accident will happen before it does, but the fact that she knows it will happen doesn't mean that she caused it to happen. To use a less gruesome example, if God knew you were going to eat an entire pecan pie by yourself over the course of a lonely weekend, that doesn't mean that he caused you to do it. That was all on you. But wait, if God is omniscient, then he can't be wrong, can he? Because if he was ever wrong, then there would have been something he didn't know. So if God knew you were going to eat the whole pie, then you couldn't not eat the pie, because if you decided not to at the last minute, then you would have just proven God wrong, thereby single-handedly stripping him of his divine omniscience.
God is the sum total of all that is true. Okay? So in terms of your knowledge of knowledge or whatever, God is all knowledge. Okay? And that which is false is against God. Again, I mean, did you miss this somehow? I don't know. Anybody else?
I prefer apple pie.
I'd actually like to hear it, Andrew, since I talked a lot.
Sure. So this is a version of what's called the lazy argument, which is basically an argument that if God knows the future, then there's nothing you can do to change the future. But the counter to this is that there's actually basically a line of causality, including your choices, that God knows. But the counter to this is that there's actually basically a line of causality. And because of that, you're actually participating in this causal chain, right? So that your will isn't something separate from the causal chain, but it's actually part of it, and therefore part of God's knowledge. And if you think about this as everything happening in the present for God, it makes a lot more sense, right? So if I'm like dancing with someone, for example, I can see and observe what they're choosing at that time, and I instantly know what they've chosen to do. And it's not as though there's a separate step between the observation of God and our choices. God sees all of our choices all at once, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Well, going back to that, I really love that. I thank you for bringing that engine too. God would be the sum that would know all possible pasts, all possible futures. That makes perfect sense, because God, being eternal, is beyond time and space, which the Bible clearly says in different non-modernese words. So yeah, and it is true, free will is a tricky one, but again, what I would be inviting you to do is to invite the alternative, which is that there is no ultimate intelligence running things. The universe is fundamentally incoherent in the end, because it's all just a result of blind random forces that we don't really understand where they come from, why they're doing what they're doing, why they haven't stopped doing that. You know, the laws of physics and probability. We don't know none of that, but we're pretty sure that just kind of all runs itself. It's kind of a problem for the presuppositional worldview you're coming from. Once you understand the idea of God, the universe suddenly snaps into greater coherence. I'm here to tell you, because I was an atheist for decades. Shall we keep going, guys? Or
hey, Deflating Atheism has joined us.
Oh, hey,
atheism.
All right. Did you want to jump in on this, Mr. Deflating Atheism, or can we proceed to the next segment?
Well, to be quite honest, I thought you guys covered it all very well, but I was kind of wrapped up in a technical issue when he was explaining the whole train track scenario. So unless there was actually an argument contained in that train track scenario that was different than what he described before, I have nothing to say.
Yeah, well, probably building up to the omnibenevolent God would take you off the train track and save you, but he hasn't gotten there yet. Let's see where he goes with this next. Let's give him some more time.
Good job. So the knowledge and power of God are, to say the least, philosophically perplexing. Now let's consider another question about God's personal skill set. Can God sin? If he's omnipotent, it would seem that he can, because he can do anything. But if he's omnibenevolent or inherently good, then it would seem that he can't.
Stop. God can, but God chooses not to. But then again, sin just means missing the mark.
Boom. Problem solved.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I would say that
no, that's what sin means.
Well, sin means rebellion against God. Right. So it doesn't make any logical sense for God to be able to rebel against himself. That doesn't even...
That's right. Or to God to infracture himself. Yeah, another way. Or if I were to put it, if you don't like Buckley's more ancient phrasing, I was like, God is all powerful, including the definition of good. So when you are missing the mark, when you are going against good, you are going against God. Okay, God ultimately is the only definite way you can even define good. God is like, as God is all knowledge, God is all that is good. Going against it is what is bad. Also, I hear the moral presupposition here that you see some suffering, some pain, some horrible injustice. Believe me, I've seen a lot of that in my life and my work. Unbelievable amounts of pain, agony, horror. I've seen a lot in my life, and but I know that this, I don't just snuff like a candle. Neither do you. We got lots of evidence that we don't. God knows what's best in the end, and we have ample evidence of better to come. Even outside the Christian religion, we got that in contemporary peer-reviewed science. At some point, the jig is up, you guys. I mean, what may seem inconceivably awful here, you get to the other side, may well make sense. Because, by the way, God's infinitely intelligent, and you're not, and God's all-knowing, and you're not. You're putting yourself in the position of judging something, someone infinitely more intelligent than you and infinitely more aware than you. So, by what moral standard you would judge anything otherwise? Go ahead. Anybody else?
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, I think there is a clear analog with the so-called omnipotence paradox. And I tackled this, and I kind of wish I had explained myself better at the time. But my position with both, the so-called omnipotence paradox and a question like, can God sin, is I think the question is malformed. The question is incoherent. It's nonsensical for reasons that take a little understanding to grasp. So there is a kind of front line of defense for both things. For the omnipotence paradox, it's, you say, can God create a rock so heavy he can't lift it? You could just say, yes, he can, but he chooses not to. And so when you ask, can God sin? You could say, yes, he can, but he just chooses not to. Now, that is like the superficial answer. So accepting the terms of the argument, that should be enough to kind of satisfy the person. But it doesn't really get to the whole nut of the issue as to why those questions are truly incoherent to begin with. But yeah, I agree with what White Engine said, is that you could simply brush the whole question off by saying, yes, he can sin, he just chooses not to. The deeper issue is that it is nonsensical to say that for God to sin, since God is the ground of morality.
Well, yeah, and
sin.
There's also a contradiction there. The reason why God could not have any evil within him is that evil is a form of privation, according to the privation theory introduced by people like Aristotle and later Augustine. And if God had a privation, that means he was not fulfilling certain potentials he was not being fully himself. And if God had potentials, then he could not be the first cause, because the first cause needs to have no potentials.
So, and this is actually a really interesting question, because it actually gets into the what sin is, right? So if we start with the starting points of God of being omnipotent, being all-powerful, and omnibenevolent, that means that God can do everything, and nothing that God does is a sin. So what is a sin? That means that sin is non-being. Sin is actually a nothingness, and that ties into the relation of being, goodness, and beauty, right? That being is actually convertible to goodness, and that's the sort of connection here, that goodness is creation. And since creation is what God does, God is goodness, because God is, by analogy, being, or the ground of being, to be more precise. And so God can't sin because sin is non-being.
Yep. All right, let's
Yeah, that's a very good way to put it. Thank you, Andrew.
All right, let's see if we can get more. I expect more in this vein from him, but let's see.
But he can't. This doctrine, which says that God can't sin, is known as divine impeccability. But if God is impeccable and incapable of sin, then doesn't that mean that he is not omnipotent? After all, I can sin easily. I mean, give me 5 minutes. I could probably break like 2 or 3 commandments, like the ones about...
Yeah, we did.
Not the murdery ones. Still, it seems kind of weird to think that I can do something that God can't. Some people try to solve this particular puzzle by saying that sin is necessarily a failure, so therefore a perfect being can't do it. Others say that even though God might do something that would be a sin if a human did it, the idea of sin simply doesn't apply to God, perhaps because given his omnibenevolence, everything that God does is inherently good. Now, many philosophers...
Yeah, I was going to call it, we pretty much just declared it. God is definitionally good. Yeah, you kind of made an objection there, but you have no standard for what is good without that. Go ahead and give it to us. Find us a coherent one, Mr. Presuppositional, there is no God, or whatever this perspective you're coming from, because it seems rather incoherent. What is your, definition of God, of good? Then I don't think you can provide one.
Find this solution troubling because it kind of makes God's goodness vacuous. After all, it basically means that saying God did a thing would be the same thing as saying God did a good thing, because ipso facto, anything God does is good. And if that's the case, then his goodness doesn't have any real meaning. Yet another possible contradiction presents itself in the belief that the omni-God is also a personal God. Many people find it difficult to suppose that God could be omnitemporal and omniscient, yet still have a personal relationship with his creatures. It's hard
Can we stop it here? Yeah, well, I mean, that is a hard problem, and it's almost as though, God would have to tabernacle in the flesh among his creatures in order to have that sort of personal relationship.
Boom. Do you even understand what the concept of the divine logos is, and understand that the Christian idea is that God became flesh, became man, chose to do that, chose to punch through the space-time continuum and make himself a human being for 33 years. That's the basic tale of the incarnation, a philosophically powerful one. But anyway.
I would like to, one thing on my end, even if you don't believe Christianity is true, the fact that God has something analogous to intellect and something analogous to free will, and is also responsible for making sure that everything that exists now continues to exist and continues to exist. I mean, he's literally responsible for the operations of everything, really. All causal powers are derived from him, which means that his presence is sorry, I'm stuttering. His presence is in all of creation because he's causing everything to happen. So you can say that God is personal in that he's present everywhere, and he has something analogous to what we call intellect and free will.
Then there's also the problem of natural disasters some bring up.
Oh, I don't think that's relevant here. I mean, this is talking about how God can be both eternal and personal.
No, I was about to be honest with you, I'll even go with the natural disasters thing. I mean, I could get into some airy stuff, but I mean, that, if God is the sum of all total pasts and futures, all possible paths and futures, and human behavior actually, having a relationship to what happens in the natural world is not that crazy a thing to assert or to think might happen. And B, again, revert back to the answer of when you compare to eternity, no matter how much and how awful it seems to be here, it's over in the blink of an eye, less than the blink of an eye, in eternity, which is where, heaven is supposed to be. As understood for thousands of years. Anybody else got anything else?
Let's go.
All right.
could relate to us or feel the way we feel if he doesn't experience time as we do. If he already knows what's going to happen, how could he ever be surprised or change his mind? And if God is omnitemporal, is it even possible that he could be moved to respond to prayers? Let's look at this idea up close in this week's Flash Philosophy.
He's making time happen. Again, we've known this for a long time. Okay, anyway.
Thought bubble. When people talk about praying for something to happen or to not happen or are otherwise making a request of God, they're making what are known as petitionary prayers. When you pray in this way, you're asking God for something. To help you pass a test, or to save a loved one who's in danger, or to make sure the Patriots win the game. Contemporary American philosopher Eleanor Stump argues that we have no reason to think that asking God for something would actually make a difference. She thinks about it like this. If God knows everything, including the future, which he does if he's omniscient, and if God has the power to bring about any state of affairs, which he does if he's omnipotent, and if he always wants to bring about the best state of affairs, which he does if he's omnibenevolent, then God has already decided what's going to happen in every single case. To everyone, always. So either your prayer is asking God to do something he was already going to do, in which case your prayer was kind of a waste of time, or your prayer is asking God to do something he's already decided not to do because it wasn't actually the best thing. Sorry, Patriots. And in that case, even if God would change his mind based on your prayer, you wouldn't want him to because it would actually make things worse than they would have been if you just let God do his thing. In other words, if God knows what's best, why would you want to change his mind?
All right.
The point of prayer is not to change God's mind.
It depends on
it's to honor God, to thank it, and give it the credit, as well as asking for insight into its will.
Yeah, I prefer the traditional phrasing of he, but okay.
That's gender, so it's rather insulting to call him he in this day and age.
Well, yes,
I
don't care.
Argument another time. Let me just get to this. God has been understood classically as the intelligence that's running the laws of physics and probability. If God is running probability, which is again, this is not a novel thing I'm saying. God is in charge of probability. And yes, your petitionary prayers might well be able to have an effect. And by the way, we have a number of peer-reviewed studies, double-blind, showing the petitionary prayers do have effects, undeniably. Even in double-blind tests, and so, and by the way, come ask for references. I'm not going to just slap them up here. We've got actually quite a bit that suggests that prayers do work, that intercessory prayers do work.
Sorry for interrupting. Are you done?
Yeah, go ahead.
This, and I apologize, earlier in the stream I got a little confused. This is actually directly what's called the lazy argument, which is basically restating it, and we've known about it for a very long time, thousands of years, which is basically, if you're fated that you will recover from this illness, then regardless of whether you consult a doctor or not, you will recover. So you don't need to go to the doctor because fate exists, right? This is sort of the argument So the issue with this is things can be co-fated together, right? So if you want to have children, this is co-fated with a line with a woman and conceiving, and so this is sort of denying that fundamentally, if we're made in the image of God, we're to actually take part in co-creation, and part of co-creation is actually petitionary prayer. And because we're engaging in co-creation, that means that our prayers are actually effective and helping bring about this wonderful state of affairs that God wants, which includes our active participation in creation.
By the way,
exactly. So go ahead, Buckley.
I was just going to say, he mentioned that the philosopher that the only philosopher the funny thing is, when he brought up the only philosopher he named about this argument that petitionary prayer is pointless, it was Eleanor Stump. Eleanor Stump is a Catholic Thomist who actually argued against this in a peer-reviewed paper.
That's hilarious.
So this guy said, "Oh, this lady made the argument that petitionary prayer is useless," when she did an entire peer-reviewed paper arguing against this argument. I mean, granted, she did say he did represent her accurately when she said that petitionary prayer does not change God's mind because God cannot change, as per Thomistic philosophy. But it's kind of shaky in my opinion.
I have to call it out again. Flip this around, please, and be fair. If your presuppositional, lack of belief in anything in particular universe, still, are you're suggesting a guiding intelligence operating if everything is not present? Like, why is this in a godless universe? Essentially, why would you even care what happens to you? I guess it's all just a matter of blind impulses, and then blind electrochemical impulses, which is, by the way, not scientifically accurate, but whatever. In the end, in your godless universe, now what? Okay, you have the same question. Why would you want to change anything that happens? Except, I don't know, for some kind of pleasure-pain response. In the end, why even exist? Why not snuff it like a candle? I mean, who cares? You've got no reason to want to keep living anyway, do you?
Yeah, and that's sort of where fatalism leads, right? That if, yeah.
Yeah. You guys really need to examine your presuppositional atheism. If I get you to the God of Aristotle, I'll be happy. Because this is pretty basic stuff, a lot of it.
Well, this is all kind of new to me, so I'm just jumping into this. But what I will say for this argument is that it's not the argument if God is omnibenevolent, why do bad things happen? It's a step above that, but the argument seems to be if God is omnibenevolent, why doesn't he not affect the best possible state of affairs, assuming there is a best possible state of affairs, which isn't really much of an improvement on the kind of very vulgar kind of, why do bad things happen to good people argument. So,
I don't think that's actually what he's saying here. I think what he's saying is, what's the point of prayer if I can't change God's mind? Because he already knows.
That was half of it. That was half of it. The other half of it is that if God is omnibenevolent, he will affect the best possible state of affairs in any case. And what I'm saying is, for the traditional Catholic response is that God creates a greater good out of the liberty we have to be evil or to suffer. That could apply to any number of states of affairs. So it's like this just seems like a slightly tooled up version of the problem of evil.
Yeah.
And again, in your nihilist universe, I mean, you're going right for the nihilist response. Basically, you're almost in the. You're basically, this is. I hate to say it, but this is like a primitive Calvinist argument, because it's like, oh, everything's fated in the end. Why try anything?
Oh yeah, I was about to say, RC apologies, but I have fun with the other question.
Oh God, yeah. Let's just keep going. Let's just keep going. Whoopsie.
Now, Stump suggests that there might be some value in the asking, even if the prayer doesn't actually change what's going to happen. Maybe you agree with her. But at this point, it should be clear just how many problems there are in the divine attributes when you think about them.
No.
Thomas Aquinas, the thinker who's
You want me to stop?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. Responsible for the traditional divine attributes we think of today, responded to these sorts of puzzles by saying that all the speculation of what God is like is just analogical predication. Basically,
false.
We can't.
That was his use of analogical predication wasn't to handle any perceived inconsistencies in the divine attributes. They were to articulate that all the speaking we do about God is insufficient to uncover God. Thomas Aquinas, like the good, scholastic, almost autistic person, was very careful not to have any inconsistencies in his theology, especially about the basics of what the divine attributes were.
Oh yeah. If I may, maybe we can let him speak. Let's let this guy speak a bit, and then I can correct and then I can
Stop. Tell me when to stop. Go.
or assert anything about God because he's so far beyond our understanding. When we speak of God, Aquinas said, we never really say anything that's true. Instead, we have to speak entirely in analogies because that's all we can do. So God isn't literally our father, for example, but we can understand his role for us as being father-like because that's as close as we can get to really understanding what he is. Or think of it this way. People in South Florida might say it's cold when the temperature dips into the 50s, but in Alaska, it's not cold until it's well below zero. But both of those frames of reference are more similar to each other than they are to the cold that is absolute zero, which is about negative 273 degrees Celsius. You might even say that absolute zero cold and negative 10 degree cold are not even the same thing. But we use that one word, cold, to describe them both as a kind of analogical way of talking about something that defies our complete and personal understanding.
Okay, like we can stop there. He does. I think in the second half, he does a good job of articulating what Aquinas meant by the doctrine of analogy. What
I agree.
Aquinas meant was basically, he basically made a distinction between three different ways of speaking about something. Either univocally, which is where like word and like word, a like word and like word. Like when I say that I'm intelligent, and when I say that Max is intelligent, that we're talking about the same type of intelligence. And then we can talk about equivocally, which is when I talk about like a mouse, a pet mouse that I have, and the mouse on my computer. That's equivalence. That is equivocation. That is not the same thing. You're not talking about the same thing. You're just using the same word for different things. And Aquinas, in order to get around the Aquinas talked about a third way between these two called analogy. Basically, we can say that we can't say that God has intellect like a human has intellect, but we can say that he has something like intellect. And the reason why Aquinas wanted to do this is, one, he wanted to point out that God was radically different from anything we know of. And number two, he wanted to be able to say positive things about God, with positive things about God, which would be impossible without analogies, because a lot of philosophers back before Aquinas, especially the Neoplatonists, the Platonists like Augustine and Dionysius, they were big fans of negative theology. The idea that you can't say anything positive about God, you can only say what God isn't. Aquinas would have disagreed with them and said, no, you can say positive things about God, but you have to make it in the form of an analogy.
Okay, and that's all. That's rigorous, and that's very Aquinas. I would also just give the shorter answer is that ultimately this is conceding the defeat of human intellect. We're not capable of fully understanding an infinite eternal being. We can only say so much. We can only comprehend so much. But we can say some things about what an infinite intelligence running everything would be like and what it wouldn't be like. Fair enough. I mean, that's a short way of putting it, but he just gave you a much better. But I mean, really, is something ultimately running things or not? Is something intelligent ultimately running physics, probability, and all that we see and don't see, like logic, or not? Is it, or it just all just kind of randomly goes that way? There you go. All right, should we keep going?
Yeah, I'll just say that God in his totality exceeds our ability to understand him. That does not mean that we cannot make true or false claims about him, or examine true or false claims about him. And we could examine claims about omnipotence or omnibenevolence and examine them on logical grounds, while still at the same time maintaining that God in his totality exceeds our understanding.
Right.
Well, and when this guy says that we can't say true things about God, the entire point of using an analogy is so that we can say true things about God. So he fails there.
Yeah, yeah. Ultimately, let's put it this way for his audience, then we'll move on. Let's just say that you are really brilliant and you have a 150 IQ, which is stellar high. Very few people are that high. Let's say yours is that high. Now, think of a being with an IQ of infinity. How much can the super genius human understand the IQ infinity being? He can't, but he can know some things about it, just like a dog can know something about his master without really comprehending anything close to what the world of humans is really like. The dog will still be able to understand that. There you go. So let's keep going. Get this finished up soon here.
Basically said not to worry about all of these puzzles because none of these things we say about God is more than an approximation, a little analog that our tiny little minds can come up with so that we can talk about an infinite being. Now, there are other thinkers, particularly in modern times, who point out that none of the traditional divine attributes are in the Bible anyway, so maybe God isn't
we already
God.
We already covered this. This is annoying. We already covered this.
Like, even I mean, there are people who there are modern philosophers who do say that God is more like a comic book character, and that God is and they disagree with the traditional thinkers, but he's misrepresenting them too, because they would say that, oh, God has the divine attributes, he just has them in a more qualified sense.
Oh, whatever, man. All right, let's keep going.
Maybe he's more like a superhero. He can be way smarter than us, way more powerful than us, way more good than us, but still not perfect. This seems like a sacrilege to a lot of people, but some philosophers argue that it's more compatible with the God of the Bible. After all, in the Bible, we see God doing very human things, like walking in the garden, getting angry, being surprised, and changing his mind. So it could be possible that God actually does hate cilantro or is a big fan of amethyst. That's the kind of stuff that we, as philosophers, get to ponder kindly and thoughtfully in the comments. Today, we learned about the traditional...
Yeah, this was pretty flawed, and I can hear formally trained philosophers everywhere wanting to pull. I mean, come on, guy. Have you really tried hard here to understand? I mean, it almost seems like an exercise in confusing your audience and not trying to clarify things for them.
Yeah, and I think the fundamental thing that they basically lost out on was going through the effort to figure out what God or what the supreme being is compared to a mere deity. And a lot of the confusions sort of come from conflating those two things.
You know, what he really missed out on doing, in my opinion, is explaining why we attribute certain things to God. Why do we call God omnipotent? It's because it's not. I mean, according to him, it's not because the Bible said so. So why do we do it in the first place? It seems like a mystery to him.
Yeah, and I'll be a little more sympathetic and say that he didn't say that the Bible didn't say it. He said modern thinkers claim the Bible didn't say it. So, but that's the thing is those types of strains of modern theology are very wrong, basically.
Well, yeah, I mean, let's not give the impression that more modern philosophers have come along to say, yeah, you know, if God can God, you know, create a rock so heavy he can't lift it. That has not happened, not among, you know, actual academic sophisticated philosophers. This just seems, again, it's another example of what I call bait and switch atheist propaganda. He could have made an effort to educate his audience. He had no intention of educating his audience. He didn't even make an effort to show both sides of an issue with kind of unsophisticated opinions. So I can't even be that charitable to him that he simply was speaking in ignorance, because it was so obviously an attempt to indoctrinate his audience into atheism.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. It really did feel like an intentional effort to obfuscate the issues rather than bring somebody in intelligent. I do think, though, I mean, it does bother me. I think it's a fair cop that I think certain types of evangelists have made it easy to muddy the waters here. I've really never thought that much of, to be honest, of, you know, traveling Bible guys making arguments for God and then just selling, because a lot of them make the jump straight from there has to be a God, therefore Jesus. And I know it makes some Christians think I'm wishy-washy or something, but really, I grew up hearing about so many different religious traditions. It was actually real important to me when I became a Catholic, and which was late in life, that they made it really clear. No, there is absolutely spiritual truth in other religions, and all religions know God, and many other religions know God in some sense. That was like key to me being able to say, okay, you know, the reputation that the church had for such complete, you know, hostility, dismissal of other traditions meant a lot to me, because I had a lot of friends in other traditions. And by the way, everybody here is not Catholic by a long shot, especially not Brass. So that's okay. We love them anyway. And also not Andrew. But it's almost like we raised the kids on dumb, stupid, shallow atheists like T.J. Kirk, and now we're graduating to some more sophisticated ones who are at least kind and polite and have put some thought in, but it's bothersome. It's like, have you talked to a trained philosopher who is not religious at all, who can still take you apart? Let's mention again Ed Feser's book, 5 Books of God, Proofs of God. Ed Feser went through this.
5 Proofs for the Existence of God.
5 Proofs for the Existence of God by Ed Feser. Yeah, let me put that. Well, we've already put it on the screen. He should be aware. If he's into philosophy, he should be aware of it. Professor Feser was, like I was, for most of his life, an atheist, and he began to look at some of the, you know, classical proofs of God and realized that they had been misstated for him, and that he had really not understood them. And when he dug into them, he found that they were actually much more rigorous than he thought they were, and much more unchallengeable. And he eventually became convinced that there was a God. Now, he did make the jump all the way to Catholicism. It would just be fair to say that not everybody goes that far, goes that direction. A lot, you know, Anthony Flew, the great atheist of the 20th century, he turned around, he studied Aristotle, he decided there had to be a God, and he still did not become religious. Our friend Mr. Brass, on the, you know, who's on here a lot, is a deist. He's an apostate Christian. He's still pretty clear there has to be a God. You know, at some point, you guys got to really look at your presuppositional atheism, because it's kind of an invention, going back from Anthony Flew, actually. But we can get into that another time. Does anybody else want to say anything before we wrap this up?
Yeah. Like, name me one verse where God is surprised about anything.
Oh, well,
God's walking around getting angry. God's allowed to get angry.
Yeah, well, God's anger is kindled a few times, especially in the Old Testament, and you do have Jacob wrestling with God.
That was the angel of the Lord, the pre-incarnate Christ.
And well, that's in your tradition. I don't know that I'm going to endorse that, but you know, that's an interpretation. We'll leave it at there. That's an interpretation. And what was I going to say? We have Moses flat out arguing with God. I was just going, I mean, I've been reading the Old Testament with my son. We're reading the whole thing. Moses argues with God. But I think that goes back to all that stuff we were saying about intercessory prayers and God being the sum total of all possible pasts and futures. I really like that. I'm never forgetting that one, because it makes perfect sense. But we do have a relationship with God, and we do have free will. We manifestly have free will. It's absurd to think we don't. And God interacts with us. And when we choose to move toward God versus when we choose to move away from God, you know, away from good and truth, or towards good and truth, the better things tend to be. It's not that hard, and this is fully compatible with Christianity, but it's not even necessarily Christian, because it's not the only tradition that has things like that. Anybody else? Final thoughts?
I have a question. In the upper left-hand corner of this video, I saw a PBS logo. So was this done under the aegis of the Public Broadcasting Company?
You know, it probably was.
That is depressing. That is depressing.
Well, that does put it in the realm. That does put it in the realm of propaganda, if so.
Yeah, I mean, you said he's nicer. You said he's nicer than T.J. Kirk. I won't give him that because this was so clearly a hit piece. It was so clearly a hit piece. Now, if he has the PBS underneath him and he has 8 million subscribers, he has resources. He could have sought out an educated opinion, but he didn't. Instead, he just chose to slander basically theism in complete ignorance.
I can see that.
Actually, I did not see that it was PBS in particular. I see that they're Patreon funded, but I mean, they may have gotten corporate grants for this, and it could have gotten grants from multiple sources because they are very well funded and were from the beginning. So they got, this is not a grassroots Kickstarter. Let me put it this way: they've obviously got supporters and resources. And this was a couple of years ago they made this, but yeah, no, this would have to count as a level of miseducation. Honest to God, these are not. It's all presuppositional atheist nonsense. Anybody else?
I just want to say that Max, you seem to have morphed into a clone of Andrew.
It's all because we are changing. We are changing over to group account status and confusion. I don't even log into this Red Pill Religion account anymore. Just let it go. This will resolve itself. Anybody else?
I was just having fun with you, man.
No problem. So okay, well, I'm gonna wrap it up, guys. If nobody else wants to say anything more, I'm going to be going on my 33-day sabbatical. You almost certainly won't see me, everybody. I will not be using any social media. I'll even be avoiding email if I can. And so wish me luck. And really, it's what we've said from a long time, and it's going to become even more true and more apparent now. Red Pill Religion's always been a group project, I mean, for 3 years, just about now, and it's even going to become more one. And we're going to be doing more to get us up on more platforms and make it harder for them to take us out. But in the meantime, I'm taking a long-winded rest. So, Andrew, I'll let everybody, I'll let you end the stream. I'm going to drop everybody. Good night, everybody.
Good night. And God bless everyone. And we will catch you on the flip side.